where we are going to go into the real estate we are talking about.
Well, these developments come as the world today celebrates International Youth Day, a day set aside by the United Nations to highlight the importance of the actions of young people towards a great society. Now, each year, the observance of International Youth Day is marked with a theme relevant to the times. And the theme for 2020 this year is Youth Engagement for Global Action, a theme that has never been of greater significance as opposed to the current conditions. So let's have this conversation now with Vania Kibush. She is a policy advocacy specialist with Youth Action, also working with AMREF. Vania, many thanks for joining us here on Bottomline Africa. The world today celebrates International Youth Day. If you've been listening to the stories we've been running, there's very little to celebrate really for the youth in these times. But what is the significance of the theme for this year?
Thank you so much for having me, and I agree. What is making the news now is not necessarily looks like not so much to celebrate, but it brings us back to the conversation we started having 3 years ago on harnessing the demographic dividend. And the reason to celebrate is the fact that states are now paying attention to the change in to the demographic change, and they're realizing that if you don't invest, because harnessing your demographic dividend means that you need to invest in the change in demography in a way that the economy can reap the best out of it, right? Because you can have a demographic shift and then do nothing about it, and then you can have a crisis. And I think you've had His Excellency the President before say that the youth bulge we have could either be a threat or a big opportunity. And COVID-19 has caused a lot of people to listen. It's interesting that we say it's a new normal. It's not a new normal. Young people were not always at the center of the conversation. COVID-19 has made it that a lot of disparities, especially affecting young people, adolescents, and women have come to the fore. So in a way, it has forced us to think. And so it was an opportune moment even for us to kind of look at what areas of investment do we need to focus on for us to get the most benefit.
Right.
So when you look at the theme for global action, I think there will, in my mind, it would be small efforts that come together that then make a bigger global impact.
Right. And I think, Vania, we all grew up in the age of youth, the leaders of tomorrow, youth, the future. And many are saying now it's time to stop waiting for what the youth can do in the future and start involving the youth, in policy making and advocacy as early as now. So this year's theme, Youth Engagement for Global Action, is again to highlight the ways in which engagement of young people at the local level, national level, and global level can enrich Kenyans. But let's draw lessons from Kenya's, situation alone. In the last election, we elected very young people to represent the youth in parliament, in politics. What lessons can we draw from that representation?
So we did elect young people, which is, and it's kind of, it's reflecting like the population as it exists, right? But the reason we actually, as Youth in Action, partnered with Kenyan parliamentarians was that the gap that we kept hearing as Youth in Action was we aren't able, as young people, to bridge the gap of how to influence policy. And so we can have young people there and then have systems that don't serve the youth or systems that don't serve the society as it exists.
Right.
So creating a framework that has, that creates a direct source of accountability and responsibility for the lawmaking arm of the government, to that it sets agendas influenced by young people and has young people participate in the communicating, negotiations, and debating of policy issues, then that's the shift. Because we have a lot of young people involved in social economic engagements and community projects. And not to say that Youth in Action is the first organization to engage policymakers. There are many who mobilization and movement building is a core part of working as young people and creating a change. But then creating a threshold for lawmaking was a gap, right? So that's what we're looking to cure.
All right,
Yeah.
let's talk about the fact that, Vania, we only have 10 years remaining to make the 2030 agenda a reality for all. But as we say that, with COVID-19, we're staring at massive job losses. We have human rights violations, human trafficking, child labor, all dogging the community as we speak. How can youth take matters into their own hands to ensure Vision 2030 is a reality for them?
So there's certain ways, there are certain levels. The first thing is that struck me and many of us who who work in this sector, I would say non-state actors, is the, I'm looking for the English word, the fact that accountability quickly left, it was the first aspect of governance that was out the window, so to speak. And this is what I mean. Decision-making became very top-heavy and not community engaging, right? So where resources were applied, it was a reflection of the way governance exists at the moment, right? So it wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't, I would say, a deliberate action by the government to leave out young people, but the government structures as they exist, because they already don't integrate aggressive community engagement, especially focusing on young people and women, then their voice was not there. So you find that the fissures or the gaps that already exist in your in our approach to governance were then magnified. The same thing goes with economic and gender disparities. So our conversation would be to create policy frameworks that protect accountability, elevate it to a very high threshold of responsibility for policy making, and then entrench it in how we operate even at a private company level. So that at the time when, because COVID-19 has shown us, bad days will come. So the question is, who will suffer the most when your bad day comes, and who is protected? So if you have a policy requirement that says when you're coming up with an appropriation bill for emergency funds, you must consult that community, even if it's a flood. They must be.
Let's bring into the conversation Molo Member of Parliament Kimani Kuria. Many thanks for your time and many thanks for joining the conversation. It is the International Youth Day. We're looking at how young youth and young Kenyans as well can get into the playground and contribute to enriching national and multilateral institutions in the country. As a young Kenyan policymakers, what lessons have you drawn from your experience?
Thank you very much for having me. Sorry, I joined a little late. I had a meeting. This day is Bunge Day, so we had some transactions to do at Parliament. And happy International Day to all the young people in the country and in the world. It's such a great day that we get to celebrate young people. And most importantly, I'd like to say, when we mean by young people, we mean those below the age of 35. Because one of the things that I feel has not been celebrated enough, or has not been done well enough, is we have many people who get appointments that were meant for youth because they are youthful. And so you find people simply because they probably look young, but you find them in their 50s, some of them even in their 60s, being appointed to positions that should have been for the young people. And I'll say for this day, I have learned something as a young person, that if we wait for us to be given anything in this country or anywhere in the world, it will never happen. So I've seen many young people wake up and go and grab and compete for those, whether it's positions, whether it's businesses, in whichever sector that they want, that they want to find themselves in. And I've also find them work very hard in a way that they even stand out And I would even say, even if you look at, for example, in our media houses, we had people that were there, like the Kasavulis, all those media personnel that were there, that are generations older, and we found a breed of young people that when we look at our screens almost all the time, we're seeing fresh blood, we're seeing very young people. If you come to the face of politics was known to be for the old people. But you find we have almost 50 of us who are actually below 35 years of age. Mm-hmm. If you go to CEOs of institutions, you've seen young people. And because these people have actually realized that we're not waiting to be given, but we are going to forcefully take those positions. Not because we're young people, but we are competent young people who can serve well our country, in our media industry, in our corporate sector, and whichever other sector that you choose.
Right. And I mean, we're also talking about including young people and, having their say in policy making and legislation. But when you take a look at, the African context, you talk about politics and trust, I mean, they cannot go in the same statement. But trust in public institutions, especially in Kenya, is eroding more so among the youth who make up the largest demographic. But does enabling youth engagement in formal political mechanisms really increase fairness in these political processes?
Thank you very much for your question. I'm one of the people that say, if there's one population that is judged extremely harshly, whether it's by the media, whether it's the public, is young politicians. The political job is not necessarily a popular job, because unlike for example, when you went to work, you knew you're probably reading the 1 p.m. news, and after that, you probably read another news at 4 p.m. Whatever it is, the job description is extremely clear. But if in politics, politicians expected from one legislation, whether it's the key functions of a member of parliament, for example, will be legislation, representation, and oversight. But we're even expected to provide solutions, whether short-term or long-term, to people's problems. So when people get hungry, it is the politician's problem. When the road is not fixed, it's the politician's problem. When the hospital is not working, it's a politician's problem. And we have realized that we do not have all the solutions to these problems. And that's why, for example, the project that we launched this week, we're beginning this engagement between, for example, Parliament and the young people, so that those ideas that can be brought into law that we can implement, so that we find lasting solutions to youth problems then can be found. But to more directly answer your question, yes, there has been eroding trust with politics, and it's not just in Kenya, it's everywhere in the world. The politician is the most unpopular person. But more so when you are a young person. There are things that you can do and you can get away with it, but if I do, and because I'm a politician, then I don't get away with it. But even more so, and I find this extremely unfair, sometimes you judge us against politicians that have been in parliament for 20 years. There's something learning curve. So definitely, by the time someone is doing his third term, is doing 15 years in politics, their knowledge of affairs, their way of doing business would definitely, or more arguably, be a bit better because they're more experienced.
Right.
So some of us are
and I mean, it's an interesting argument, because I would say we needed fresh blood. They're not, so deep-rooted into the system. But pause it there. Let me bring in Vania Kibush. She is with us here. She is a policy advocacy specialist. Vania, just hearing what Honorable Kimani Kuria there says, sometimes his job description is very cut out. So we must say these young politicians are not delivering, but it's the system, like you say, that does not favor these young politicians to deliver, so to speak. So where do we bridge the gap, Vania, into ensuring that youth in politics, youth in leadership positions can have their say in legislation and advocacy?
Okay, thank you. Yes, and I would say one of the results we got when we did a very brief inquiry before we came up with the framework was institutional capacity gaps within, I would say, the parliament, right? So it takes a while, even as Honorable Kuria Kimani said, before you get into parliament, you're not really looking at what's my job going to be when I get there. It's first about securing the seat. And you're a reflection of what the society is like. So what this framework looks like, so one of them is like a leadership engagement series. And we have a youth parliament. And that's these are just a few interventions that are meant to demystify this this house of lawmaking, and also we have like a political like an essay contest from young people to support them to set the agenda. But this is just the beginning, where we want to work with other youth-led organizations and youth-serving organizations to create a roadmap that also works with the parliament to break down the bureaucracies of having our views get to parliament. So that if it's a memo, let me even be able to just go on your website and have a comment section and type something. Or it is written by hand, or it is a voice note. Because as I said, the way that parliament is set up to listen, because young people is not reflecting young people. So some of the results we got also showed us that by the time young people were involved in a policy, in a bill, let's say, it was mostly towards the end, and to kind of rubber stamp. And they would not know how far their proposals on the bill went. So there's no feedback loop of we propose, this is what we want as an allocation for reproductive health care, focusing on commodities, and this is how far it got. So even the responsiveness of the governance approach is not there. The other thing is creating a threshold, for instance, for, let's say the law requires 2 weeks, right, notice of a public hearing being called by maybe, let's say, county government. That's not always the case. Sometimes they sent out the alert 2 days too, right? It has taken some youth organizations in some counties to boycott those hearings so that that county government cannot go there and say, oh, okay, this was a well-heard issue. Right. And even if they say 2 weeks, what steps have you taken as the policy-making institution to make that document available in every language and in simple English or any other language that young people would want to understand, even Braille, that would be available to young people as well, and to every member of the community? Have you used community radio? Right. Can we use KICD school studies right now to have blurbs on what to expect when a law is coming into office? Right. A lot of young people who have, and there was a paper in the Standard today, there was an article in the Standard today about the frustrations that young people who eventually get into policy advocacy face because of the bureaucracies that exist. Because the other challenge that young people are facing is you don't even know, after the policy is made or when it's being made, you don't know who the decision maker is. So there's a lot of investment you have to make, because maybe you're talking to the youth coordinator